How significant do you think it is that you've been able to mobilize 5,000 people to circle the White House?
10,000.
So we'll see.
Well, I think it's a good step in the right direction. We still need a lot more people than this. But this is a critical juncture because either we're going to move into these dirtier fossil fuels, the unconventional fossil fuels, or we begin to phase off of them. If we're going to solve the fossil fuel addiction, we've got to start now. It makes no sense to go into these dirtier fossil fuels.
How frustrated have you been that Obama hasn't spoken out publicly against or for this at this point?
Well, I think it's been very disappointing that he did not take this as his first big objective, or at least one of his top objectives, and really get involved himself. He cannot assign this to John Kerry or some other politician. This requires a solution in which we really do what is in the public's interest, not in what is in the interest of the big lobbyists, the big banks, the big oil, big coal, big utilities. We have to do what is needed to solve the problem, and it's very clear. He should be able to understand this. We have to put a rising price on carbon. And the money that's collected, Congress should not decide on how to invest that money. The money should go to the public. Let them invest it themselves. If they don't pay attention to their carbon footprint, their bills are going to continue to go up. If they pay attention, then they will get more in their monthly dividend than they pay in increased energy prices. And there will be a lot of jobs created because we're going to have to make some big changes if we're going to move to a clean energy future.
And as someone who's been part of this fight for a long time, how do you think the health is of the movement right now? Are there more people involved than there were 5 years ago, less?
Oh, there's a lot more now, but we need a lot more. You know, you can't do it with a very small fraction of 1%. You've got to get the politicians to understand that they're going to be out of office if they don't start doing what the public needs instead of what the big banks and the big fossil fuel industry needs.
Jim, Joe. So 6% rise in global CO2 emissions was announced for 2010, the highest ever. I guess I'd be interested sort of in your take on the latest science, which seems pretty dire. We're now tracking at the higher than the highest IPCC CO2 emissions. What's the message from the science?
Yeah, the emissions have continued up rapidly because of the move toward more coal. And if we go to unconventional fossil fuels, it's going to go up even faster. So it's very clear that we still have a chance. If we begin to reduce emissions rapidly, it would take about 5% a year, which sounds implausible. But in fact, it would be possible if we would put a significant rising price on carbon. We get to a point where you begin to have tipping points that work in the sense where it actually makes sense to use clean energy. Right now, it doesn't, because fossil fuels are subsidized and they're not made to pay for their cost to society, the impacts on human health and the impacts on climate and the environment. So we've got to begin to put the proper price on fossil fuels, and then we could solve the problem. You know, just a increase to $100 a ton in CO2 tax, which you could do over 10 years. By that time, it would reduce U.S. emissions by 30%. That is equivalent to more than 10 Keystone XL pipelines. That's how big an effect you could have if you put a rising price on fossil fuels and carbon emissions so that they paid their cost to society. And if that money were given to the public would not only allow it, but they would, 60 to 70% of them would get more in their monthly dividend than they would pay in increased energy prices. So it's a simple story, a simple solution, but no bank is going to favor that. No coal company is going to favor that. No oil company. That's the problem. There's nobody out there taking the public's position. The lobbyists are all for special interests, for special financial interests. And that's why we've got to have a populist president who understands this and takes the story to the public, because he's going to have to fight these big banks and big fossil fuel industry. So the only way he can do it is if he gets the public behind him.
Now, this is a lot of effort. I guess the question I ask is, the reason to do this is because the alternative is pretty disastrous. What happens if we don't? Can you paint a picture of this world where we don't take action on climate? We build the pipeline, we keep doing what we're doing?
Well, you can see that things, I usually talk about things that are irreversible, like ice sheet disintegration and species extermination. Those are things that will be very important on the timescale of our children's and grandchildren's lives. But there are things that are beginning to happen already now. I have a paper in preparation in which I show that the 3 standard deviation anomalies, this is extreme events.
Extreme weather events.
Extreme weather events, and specifically with regard to summer heat. The things that were happening a few tenths of 1% of the time in the second half of last century are now happening over about 10% of the Earth's land area in the summer. So it's more than an order of magnitude change. The things in Texas this year, Moscow last year, those would not have happened if we still had 1950s atmosphere.
Nothing on the ground. We don't want to get shut down.